So something that I see a lot of when I talk with my friends who are ADHD, or even in my own family and in my own life and experiences, is that when we're talking about money, usually ADHD women end up having a lot of the same money beliefs and a lot of the same money stories. And usually a lot of those stories around money are really rooted in our subconscious between like the ages of 0 to like 7, maybe 10. It's usually how we observe a lot of our caretakers talking about money. And because there is such a hereditary and genetic component to ADHD and neurodivergence, then usually the odds that we have a parent who is on the neurodivergent spectrum in some capacity is pretty high. So then essentially what this becomes is like the blind leading the blind. And specifically for neurodivergent women, ADHD women specifically, we are very good at masking, right? So we tend to mask our entire lives up until the minute that we get diagnosed formally. And then at that formal diagnosis is when we kind of begin this process of unmasking. It's not always like this. It's not always that straightforward. And even that's not straightforward. But usually this masking process, even if you're diagnosed at a young age, that masking process is still happening, and that masking is still in some capacity there. So the unmasking process involves a lot of looking at patterns and behaviors that you have established throughout your entire life that help to keep you safe, that helped you to integrate with society in a better way, in an easier way. And pulling back a lot of those layers often involve looking a lot at money. Another thing I notice ADHD women doing a lot is almost like this reliance on other people to manage their money for them, or to like make money decisions for them. It's sort of like the choice paradox, where if you're presented with too many options, then you make no choice. That is exactly how ADHD people are like wired to think. If we are given too many choices, then we don't want to make a single choice. And so, or we become really overwhelmed in that process. And so that is why a lot of ADHD or neurodivergent women will rely on their partner, or will rely on a friend or a parent or whoever to almost make those money choices for them, to tell them how to invest, to tell them how to save, to tell them how to spend. And what that ends up doing is it just contributes to the masking process. So it just contributes to us learning behaviors that end up not helping us in the long run, and are just behaviors that we learn to integrate with society. Traditional personal finance advice does not get into this like literally at all, because so much of traditional personal finance is narrowed in and honed in on white heteronormative men. And also a lot of traditional personal finance advice, if it is even for women, it is for neurotypical women. And so there's this like major gap in understanding how neurodivergent women look at money. And we, regardless of your beliefs, we do look at it differently. I want you to consider how you have looked at money your entire life. Have you ever looked at it as a tool? Have you ever looked at it as a resource? Or have you almost always looked at it as something that was bad, that was really overwhelming when you did have it, really overwhelming when you didn't have it? These are all kind of really common beliefs that neurodivergent women end up struggling with when it comes to money. Obviously, I could talk about this all day. So part of this undoing, unbecoming, unlearning process, when we do end up getting a diagnosis, or we're really taking into account how neurodivergence is affecting our lives, part of that process is looking at money. Because neurodivergent people spend in such a different way because of the way that our brains are wired. We want a dopamine hit pretty constantly. So we spend in a very typically impulsive way most of the time. And that impulsivity in women is further complicated by things like hormonal shifts, by our cycles, by where we are in life. If we are perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopause, postpartum, those all have contributing factors to how we're going to spend our money, especially as neurodivergent women. So part of that unlearning, undoing process is understanding how you want to look at money as a neurodiverse woman.